Hi, and welcome again to Off the Page. My guest today, two guests, Canadian novelists Andre Alexis and Shyam Selvadurai. Welcome to Halifax.
Thank you.
Now, I think writing a novel is a fairly dangerous undertaking in one respect. It's a huge investment of time and sweat and energy, and it's putting a whole lot of things in one basket. Does it feel like a dangerous thing to you, Andre?
I don't know. You mean politically? Or
A risk.
Or you mean personal risk?
Yes.
Well, I suppose there's always the overriding thing that you could spend years scribbling and have nobody but yourself be interested in it. So
That's the one that would worry many people.
that's a big risk.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one that's maybe the most cause of anxiety. But as to the personal stuff, it's actually difficult but helpful. So I don't think of it as being a risk.
Shyam, how do you feel about it when you're starting that novel? You know it's going to be a lot of time and it's going to be a lot of energy. And, any fear there?
Well, I think I have the same fear as Andre. I mean, you could write it and, spend enormous amounts of time and put yourself into it emotionally, and then have somebody say, well, this is just terrible. I'm sorry, I absolutely can't publish this. And I suppose we all live under the great fear that even truly great, novelists also fail every so often. And in fact, their failures are as spectacular as the successes.
Yeah.
So I think I certainly live with that fear. But there's the excitement of writing it. I mean, there's the excitement of discovery, of entering a new world, of exploring a new world. I mean, it's you learn. I mean, you're growing, you're learning. So that I think is what balances off the fear for me.
Now, you're both immigrants to Canada at very different times. Andre, when did you come to Canada?
I came to Canada when I was 4.
4 years old.
Sometime around 1961.
And you came to Canada because you always wanted to live in Canada at 4 years old, I'm sure.
Yes. I had been dreaming of snow. My parents came because my father got accepted to the University of Ottawa, the medical school. And I think that was one of the few places that did accept him, so we found ourselves in Ottawa.
So there you were, growing up in Ottawa. Shyam, you came to Canada at a very different time, different circumstances.
Yes, I came in 1984. I was 18 at the time. My parents, we decided to come because of there was a huge communal riot in 1983 between the Sinhalese and the Tamils. And my mother is Sinhalese and my father is Tamil, so it was particularly strange and difficult time for us. And our family, extended family and us as well suffered a lot because of it. So my parents decided that it was time to come, that there just wasn't a future for their children anymore.
Right. There's this myth out there often with people who write novels that somehow it really is your story. You might have changed the names or something like that, but it's really a story in one form or another about your life. How true is that with your novel, Andre, called Childhood?
Well, I accept that at a base level, that there's an emotional river that runs through you that you draw from. But the surface level is nothing that Thomas goes through have I gone through.
This is your main character.
Yeah.
He's not like you.
Not at all, I hope. And so it's problematical because when people read books, they tend to take the things that happen on the surface for actual, whereas it's the emotional undercurrents that are truest to my life. So it's a tough question. Yes, on the one hand, it's autobiographical, but no, it's absolutely not if you take the incidents such as are presented on the surface in the book.
And Shyam, your novel Cinnamon Gardens is set in the 1920s in Ceylon. I have a feeling you weren't around in the 1920s.
No, I wasn't, thank God.
Yeah.
But it's a real pain in the neck. I mean, I can understand what Andre is saying because I went through the same thing with Funny Boy. I used to get letters saying, Dear Shyam, within brackets, RG, the name of the character. Yeah. And you're like, no, it's not. But I think, it's actually, when you feel it's going to be judged that way, you actually don't put that much of yourself into it. But with Cinnamon Gardens, it was 1920s, so I felt quite free to put in as much of myself as I wanted to without having to worry about the autobiography, biography nonsense.
So you felt a bit more freedom because of the different time and place that your imagination could kick in with information that you didn't have.
And not just my imagination, I could use my own personal experiences and stories other people had told me from the present, but using them use them sort of transferring them to the 1920s without having to worry too much about anybody being exposed. It was great.
In some ways, both books seem to me to be a lot about memory. And I noticed things of the development of characters that involve the fact that we're shaped more by what we think happened in our lives than what actually happened.
I would say
What do you
that's
think, Andre?
oh, I think that's absolutely true, and that's why for me, memory can't really be spoken of without the imagination, the reconnecting glue. I mean, you have little bits and pieces of the past that you more or less have before you at times, and the struggle is to put them into some sort of coherent shape afterwards, and that's an imaginative act. And so remembering is fictionalizing on some level. Not absolutely, but there's a mirror for those two for me.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to sort out that truth in our own lives, but a novel is this great place to analyze what shapes a character. For the main characters in your novel, Shyam, there, what are the forces at work in the society that are shaping the personal lives?
Well, I think they both have role models whom they emulate and around whom they've built their lives. And for them, it's important to, I suppose, things happen in the novel that force them to reevaluate or that expose the histories of these role models and the attitudes of these role models that force the characters to reevaluate themselves and their own choices in the novel. But I don't think memory plays such a big part for them.
If you're sitting down and you're sorting out the way that you're going to create your novel, which is actually more important to you as the engine of the thing, the character or the plot?
The character of the plot. Do you want to answer that?
Good grief. It's a tough one, isn't it?
Sure. I
Which
mean, I
comes
think
first,
at
the chicken
different
or the
times, at different times, different things come to you. I mean, you might, some stories seem to suggest themselves through a voice. You just hear a certain kind of rhythm and a certain choice of words, and you know that you can stay with that. And so that's the equivalent of character. But there are other times when, for me, I know a little bit of a story. There's something, I may not know an ending. There has to be something for me to explore and discover eventually. Yeah. But I can know a shape. I can have a shape of a thing before. But it depends on which project, you know? Yeah. They come in different ways.
Shyam, do you know?
I agree.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's often character, but you know, Leslie, what it really is for me is often the social situation, you know, an exploration of a certain social milieu is for me what really often, I mean, certainly with Cinema and Gardens, what propels it forward was an exploration of a social milieu, but also a history of a certain period that, I mean, I grew up in Sri Lanka learning Sri Lankan history, but I didn't know this history. It was kind of kept from me in a way, so it was sort of reclaiming a history that I'd been sort of denied as a student, as a young man. That was sort of the engine that drove this novel.
Yeah, so you always have elements of discovery going on in the story and for yourself along the way. For both of you, this is your second book. Andre, you had a book of short stories that came out before this.
Yes.
And Shyam, you had a novel that came out before this. What's the difference between the second book and the first book? In general, the process of writing?
I think it would be a better question for Shyam to answer because in a sense, the two experiences are so different that I can't really compare them. Short stories are just a different animal, and a collection of short stories doesn't involve the same kind of writing, thinking, listening that a novel does. So I don't actually feel like I have a continuous experience with books.
Well, maybe every book is different, no matter what you're doing. What about with the novels, the second novel?
I think that, yeah, it is different, but I think for me, I mean, again, I think it varies from writer to writer. For me, it was, the second novel was really drawing on technique and the craft of a novel more than the art of a novel. Became very important in the second novel. I'm not sure why that was, but it was. So.
Do you ever hit any dead ends, Andre?
Tons of them, tons and tons and tons. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for me, it's nice to have 10 things going so that there's the hope that at least one will come to an end. And I have so many bad ideas, I can't tell you.
Keep track of them, though? You write them down?
No, I burn them.
Yeah, nobody's.
I do. Because I'll generally start and get a page in and think, oh man, this really sucks. And so throw it away.
Your novel begins in a sort of this interesting and strange way with someone documenting what they did during the hours of the day, and it's very straightforward in one sense, and it's very skeletal. Why'd you do it that way?
Don't know. That's what he wanted to do, and
He is your
that's
character.
such a stupid thing to say.
No,
isn't
it isn't.
That's
No,
what he
I don't
wanted
think
to
so at
do.
all. I think it's a
I
really...
mean, people do say that. I mean, what it is that I think sometime in 1990 I sat down, and there's a kind of obsessiveness that was, it's part of me obviously, but it was just very much there, and that came out through listening to, less even than a voice, than a kind of a really obsessive need to get things straight, to figure out what happened. And as a consequence, Thomas comes from that initial impulse, which is, how can you get things straight? And of course, you know, as I went on, I realized that that's probably one of the most futile things that human beings can do. They have to do it. They have to get things straight. But it's really a non-ending thing. So, no, I'm not like that. I'm not that obsessive. But this voice sort of was there and came
So,
from that.
and it's always interesting and kind of fertile territory to write about obsessive characters anyway, because
It
they're a bit in the
is,
extreme.
and it kind of
eccentric.
annoyed me at the end because I think that it can be a little bit of a crutch. And in fact, he became less obsessive the more I knew him, because it was less interesting for me to talk about, you know, the surface kind of qualities that you can if you have somebody that's obsessive compulsive.
Yeah. Shyam, do the characters that you're writing about ever take over your life in a similar way?
Oh, yes. I mean, Cinnamon Gardens was supposed to be set, 3/4 of Cinnamon Gardens was supposed to be set in Malaysia in the 1920s. And what was supposed to happen was that one of the main characters was supposed to marry and go to Malaysia. But by about page 30, she absolutely refused to get married, and I was suddenly
Those
stuck.
darn characters, they
I
don't
know.
do
and
what you want them to do.
It's terrible because, you know, when you go, you know, I went to Malaysia and I pounded the streets researching, and, you know, it's terrible when you go into a strange country and you don't know people and it's hot and you're running around trying to do research, and I had files and files of stuff, and out of the window it all went.
Yeah.
So it's...
How does that happen then? How does a character take on a life of his or her own and just take the story in a different direction?
I think when that happens, what's happening is you're trying to express something that you yourself can't consciously voice, and that comes out metaphorically through the characters. I mean, I don't believe that the characters absolutely get up and walk off, but I think that that's what happens, and that subsequently, you know, sometimes years later, you look back on the novel and you go, that's what I was trying to say. Oh, that's what I was going through at that time. That's the ultimate sort of vision I had, and but you don't understand it. I can't articulate that often. You know, now I can sort of articulate it for Funny Boy, but Cinnamon Gardens is still very hard to articulate that.
Do you just discover things about yourself that are in the novel? Again, you know, we were saying distancing yourself from the autobiographical elements, but do you wonder, now, why am I writing about that? Why is my character taking that
but
character?
in fact, I agree with everything that Shyam says, and I think that's very, very true. And that does happen for me as well, but I've worked in the theater, and that's an experience where there's more of an immediate trying to discover what the hidden impulse is. And so you're used to just that an actor will say, no, don't change the text. Let me see if I can work it. Let me see if I can find a motivation that makes me go from point A to point B, which seems disconnected. And in taking that ride with them, you're more quickly you have a quicker car into your psyche, I guess, you know? So
Quicker car into your psyche.
Yeah, there you go.
Driving. Yeah, that's where the novel takes you there, the character takes you there. Yeah. And once it's externalized, it's on the page, and you can look and say, oh, that was what was in my brain. I didn't know that.
But I think this thing about betraying characters, I mean, I think that's also very true, and I have that experience of doing something that is wrong for someone. But I think it's also, for me, that you set up a set of rules, you know, and that it's very strange, but you're bound to them. Once you've started, you're bound to those rules, and you know the false notes come in when you betray the rules that you've set up.
It's the rules of that world that's in the novel.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to take a very short break, and we'll be back with our two guest authors right after this.
This series is brought to you as a public service by Mount St. Vincent University.
Hi, we're back on Off the Page. My guests today are Alexis and Shyam Selvadurai, both having their second books here, and we're talking about novels. Shyam, what writers have you read along the way that got you fired up to be a writer, to be a novelist?
Well, I have to say that it changes from novel to novel. There are various influences. I really think a novel is sort of a journey, like a mythical journey in many senses, and helpers come along the way to help you along. And for me, those helpers have almost always been writers. So Cinnamon Gardens was influenced by completely different writers than Funny Boy was. And I think for Cinnamon Gardens, it was some of the 19th century writers like George Eliot, certainly E.M. Forster, Egyptian writer named Naguib Mahfouz, whom I just love and I find very inspirational. He won the Nobel Prize, I think, a few years ago. Those, I think, were the main writers who influenced this book.
So when you read one of those authors, you get fired up and more excited to tell your own stories.
And I steal too.
Yeah,
steal tons of them.
That's interesting you say that. I think all writers do. Are you a thief of words as well, Andre? A thief
Oh,
of
yeah.
ideas?
Oh, absolutely.
Confess
Literally
all. We're
words,
here on
yes.
TV.
No, there's all sorts of secret quotations, and yeah, that's part of the fabric. I mean, it's, I love that analogy of having helpers along the way for the journey. I think that's so true.
Who were some of those authors?
Well, usually when I answer that question, I always think back, well, who are the ones that made me want to write? And that's, Beckett and Tolstoy, the same as anybody else, or the common big ones. But it's very true that each project seems to call in a different set of voices that you can use. Yeah.
And you're borrowing all the time.
Stealing.
You're just going to
Absolutely.
say it flat out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, often writers don't
Word
want to
for
admit
word
that.
sometimes.
Isn't that horrible?
I've discovered images in my own writing that I thought were totally original, and then I realized that they came from something that I read a long time ago, and I'm often humbled, and I feel bad about that happening. This world of the novel, what should a novel do for the person who's sitting down and reading it? What experience do you want them to have?
Well, I want them to have the experience I have when I read a novel I particularly like. I like novels that take me into a world that's created. When I read a novel, I trust the writer has taken me into a particular world, and I want to go. I want to be lost in that world. I want to be riding the subway and thinking of the characters. I want to be cooking my dinner and thinking of the characters. I want to live with them for the duration of the book. I want to take them beyond the book and wonder what they did and what and stop suddenly and think about them as real people. If a novel does that for me, then it's an enormous success, and I feel that I've been enriched as a person. I try for that goal in my novel.
Wow,
as well.
and that's an ambitious goal, and of course
Yes,
novels can do that, and it's a great thing to do. Andre, what about you?
I certainly would love the idea of creating a lasting world, or at least a very vivid one. But for me, it's also a novel is a pretext for a play that happens between reader and book, author and book, reader and book, and they need a kind of generosity of spirit to enter into them. So. Yeah, maybe it's just offering a ground rules for a game that's fairly unusual, and you hope that someone will play by those rules. Because if we have rules that we write by, I think people have rules that they read by too.
Yeah, and it operates on intellectual and personal, and sometimes maybe even spiritual level.
Absolutely.
All those things.
Yes, absolutely.
At once. Both of you are immigrants to Canada, and has that in any way shaped the kind of writer that you are?
Well,
Shyam?
Well, I think because you're on the outside looking in, which is
that an advantage or disadvantage?
I think as a writer that's an advantage. I think even if you did belong to the so-called mainstream, I think even those writers are often on the outside looking in their own way. I mean, it may not be that obvious. It might not be as obvious as skin color or something like that. But I certainly think that it's very important to be an outsider looking in. I think the greatest position for me to possibly be in is to be an insider who's an outsider looking in. If you can be that, and for me with Sri Lanka, and particularly the milieu in Sri Lanka, I choose to explore, which is very much the upper middle class kind of cinema, what they call the Cinnamon Gardens elite. I'm an insider, but also an outsider by nature, not just of immigration, but also of sexual orientation. That also lifts me out somewhat, and I like that.
Mm-hmm. Andre, but you immigrated here 4 years old. You grew up in Ottawa. Gee, you couldn't be more in the center of Canadian civilization than that.
Well, on some level, I guess I embody Canadian civilization since I come from elsewhere. I speak French, I speak English, and I lived in Ottawa, so yeah. No, being an immigrant obviously has had a huge influence, and I think on the level that's, maybe because of my temperament, the level that's the deepest is the level of sound. The way Trinidadian music sounds, the way my parents' accent is, those were the first things that threw me into English and French and the sounds of language, and from there it's the kind of exploration outwards. So I started kind of like with the language level and move out from that.
What about these labels that people put on writers sometimes? You know, if you're a black Canadian writer, you're a gay Canadian writer. Is this helpful or harmful?
No, that's stupid. It doesn't
You don't like
help.
them?
Doesn't help if it doesn't help the reader, because it determines the direction or suggests a direction in which the work should be taken, and it's sort of, I know that people come to that and will impose that themselves, but it's sad to see critics doing it. There should be a kind of chaotic approach to it, like it could be anything, and as soon as you say black writer or gay writer or whatever, then there's the door. You can see it in relationship to that door. Well, I'd rather the door not be there.
Yeah, very limiting. How do you feel about that?
I like the word chaotic. Chaotic. I think it's good. I don't like being boxed in a particular way. At the same time, I know that sometimes it becomes a necessity for teaching a course in a university or something like that, and you want to create a course list, and you might do it around, you know, a gay or post-colonial or whatever, South Asian or whatever. I don't have a problem with that. But I think I think I don't like the critics kind of boxing me in that particular way, because I think it denies the experience of writing,
Yes.
which is basically the human experience. I mean, I think it's sort of you cheat yourself, and you short. I mean, if you pick up Cinnamon Gardens because you want to taste the exotic, well, it's there, I suppose, but you're not. But it's also about human beings who struggle to create a life. That's really not very different from Toronto in the 1990s. You know, they grapple with some of the same issues. I think that, yes, I think let's just be how about a human writer
Yes.
for now?
Yeah.
And
That'd be
after all,
okay.
this is the world of the imagination. This is the novel. It should be free of labels. We're going to take a short break and be back with our guests right after this.
If you'd like more information about this program or any of the courses we offer at a distance, call us or visit our website. We welcome your comments.
Hi again. My guests today have been Andre, Alexis, and Shyam Selvadurai. Were you both great dreamers and daydreamers? Is that part of how you became writers?
Yeah, I pick my nose endlessly.
Did you daydream in school, Shyam?
Not in school, but I used to daydream after school.
After school?
Same
You
here.
save it for after school?
I was good in school.
Yeah, I was good in school, but after school, because
I'm shocked and appalled here. You know, I thought school was the place you're supposed to daydream. Well, I thank you very much for coming and being on the show with us today. And I thank you for watching Off the Page. Check in again next time.